This passage is from Barkha's own reporting at the front when she was in her 20s. Not very different from the age your mother would have been, or perhaps a little younger. A little younger. Talking to a young captain of 23 when she herself was 27. He spoke in brusque, staccato sentences, the matter-of-fact tone in dramatic contrast to the enormity of the moment. To some, he would have seemed clinically cold, his face and manner shorn of any obvious emotion. But all I saw was his lack of guile and the gentleness in his eyes. And as the roar of guns drowned out his voice to a barely audible whisper, he suddenly seemed childlike and vulnerable. Vishal Thapa, a captain with 16 grenadiers, was 23 years old. I was 27. It was the 3rd of July, 1999. This was the first war either of us had experienced. We were huddled together in the safety of a tiny underground bunker high in the Himalayas. In a space no larger than a double bed, 8 of us, soldiers and journalists, had been brought together by the vagaries of war in a moment of unlikely but intense intimacy. Outside, cloudbursts of orange lit up the skies over the mountains of Dras and Kargil as Indian soldiers fought to reclaim territory from Pakistani intruders. The silence of the night was broken by the intermittent thunder of the Bofors gun and the sharp snap of the multi-barrel rocket launcher as it catapulted rockets into enemy lines. Every so often, a crackly update would be relayed to us on the internal communication line. In the background, in a disconcerting symbol of normality, a decrepit cassette recorder was spluttering out old Hindi movie songs. The war, which had already been raging for nearly 2 months, seemed to be entering its final and decisive phase. From the Indian perspective, one of the most important objectives of this part of the campaign was the recapture of Tiger Hill, the strategically crucial mountain peak that loomed perilously close to the national highway that connected Srinagar to Leh. Marked on the map as point 5062, Tiger Hill was over 16,500 feet high. Although it was about 10 kilometers north of the highway, the Pakistani fortification right on the peak enabled the enemy to dominate large stretches of the road below. Approximately 1 company of Pakistan's 12 Northern Light Infantry held the feature. The Indian Army was about to mount a final assault on Tiger Hill. Just an hour earlier, I'd been holding my satellite phone up to the sky to try and bring it into signal range. I'd been desperately trying to get word to the news desk in Delhi about the imminent assault when I was pulled into the bunker by a total stranger. This was the age before satellite transmission vans could broadcast live from the front line. Forget iPhones, Androids or Blackberries. Even the unsmart mobile phones of the time were blocked across the entire state of Jammu and Kashmir for security reasons. As shells from the Pakistani side poured down on the highway, we were trying to capture it all on our camera. The guns that spat flame into the dark sky, soldiers emerging from their trenches to fire their weapons and then quickly ducking for cover from the instant counterattack. The fallen bodies that lay unmoving on the tarred road. Nothing in my experience could have prepared me for reporting from the front lines. I remember recoiling sharply the first time I heard the Bofors gun blast its way across the expanse that separated the highway from Tiger Hill. And on TV, people saw me jumping out of my skin. War did not allow for any second takes. In my coverage of Kargil, beyond the politics of the conflict, what I was really trying to understand was the complex relationship between valor and vulnerability in times of war. These young men, boys who would be men really, were among the bravest people I would ever meet. Vishal, the young captain with the gentle eyes, was telling me how a soldier standing on the precipice of death dealt with the fear of the likely fall. He knew that when night turned to day, it would be his unit's turn to march up into the mountains where men fought and died. He said that he knew his life was destined to be fleeting when he signed up to be a soldier. Right now I can see my entire life race through my head like a short film, he said, in his characteristic flat tone, as I fought back my tears. You see your childhood, your adulthood, you remember your parents, your loves and your fears. And for a fraction of a second you say, no. But then you tell yourself, I've got to overcome it. This is our purpose in life. This is what we were trained for. How can we fail? Aren't you thinking of your home right now? Asked Vishal, throwing a question I had asked him right back at me. That should answer your question. I had been trying to find out from him whether soldiers in combat had a sense of being undervalued by their countrymen. We are not doing this for appreciation, he said. It's the call of duty. We are here because we have to be here. It's the uniform. And if we do not perform here, it cannot be justified. The heroism that Vishal and other soldiers who fought in Kargil displayed was perhaps most famously brought into the living rooms of their fellow Indians by Vikram Batra, a soldier with 13 J&K rifles. I met him at the base camp in Ghumri in the early days of the war. His was my first major interview with a soldier on the front line. His would also be the first obituary I would write. His men and he had just returned from a successful operation and were trading tales around a shared dog-eared copy of Cosmopolitan in a faded white tent that looked like a tiny snowdrop against the green and brown expanse of the mountains. His smiling eyes framed by a thick beard, Vikram was rather appropriately codenamed Sher Shah, after the 16th century Lion King eulogized in medieval Indian history. As he casually flipped through the pages of the magazine, which seemed oddly out of place in this setting, he recounted the details of his latest operation with the enthusiasm and bravado of a teenager. As he and his soldiers moved up the eastern flank of Point 5140, the highest mountain peak dominating the town of Dras, thus allowing the Pakistanis direct observation of Indian targets, they came under fierce artillery and small arms fire. The enemy troops were constantly firing illumination rounds to break the cover of darkness under which Vikram's team was moving up. If we had stopped at any point, Vikram told me, we would have become the target. There was no looking back. At one point, the Pakistanis intercepted the radio frequency being used by the Indians and addressed him by his military code name. They said, Sher Shah, don't try and come up. You will have a rough time. You will have a tough time. The challenge boomeranged on the Pakistanis and made Vikram even more determined to rout them. The peak was reclaimed without any fatalities. Indian helicopters were finally able to fly freely over Dras. It was a critical turning point in the war. All of 25, Vikram wore his courage lightly, throwing back his head in uproarious laughter when I questioned him on fear and vulnerability. Ye dil Maange more, he said, with a toothy grin, borrowing from the lines of what was till then only a popular cola jingle. In that instant, Vikram Batra became the face of India's self-worth. His contagious optimism immortalized him as the face of Kargil, just days before he would die, trying to save a fellow soldier who had come under enemy fire. Much later, his aging parents would share his last words as he left for the front. Vikram had told them that he would either unfurl the Indian flag to mark victory or come back home draped in one.